that are going to be attending the 2022 AOGS meeting in Honolulu can expect, in addition to a really outstanding program, lots of other cultural things that we have planned. For instance, what we had planned and what we did in 2018 was a tour of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, tour of the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology facility, part of the school that I work with, the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. Have a group of coastal geologists who led a field trip around the south coast of Oahu. There were a couple different walking tours around Waikiki, one that had a sail extension, meaning going out on a sailboat. The things that unfortunately we were not able to do last time were field trips to the Big Island to see Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Of course, 2018 was when we had the last big eruption of Kilauea. So those field trips unfortunately had to be canceled. But next year in 2022, there should be lots of really interesting parts of the Big Island to see where the 2018 eruption happened. Other possibilities also will be to visit Southeast Oahu to look at the geology of that area, including the Hanauma Bay area. And of course, lots of free beach time after the sessions are over. Well, as you know, in the past year, tourism was basically shut down in Hawaii. We had hardly any visitors from off the island. Of course, the economic impact to our state was not very good. On the other hand, the natural environment was really happy to not have so many people crowding the beaches and swimming in the offshore areas. So the biggest impact of this 1 year of no tourism has been the shall we say, renewal of marine life. Areas that are now reopened, like the popular area of Hanauma Bay and areas of the North Shore. Also, people are reporting that there are so many more fish than there used to be. In addition, Hanauma Bay has now instituted a reservation system. This is going to control the number of visitors, and marine life is expected to continue to thrive. Many of the parks and hiking trails, because they were shut down over the last year, the city and county took the advantage of that to upgrade the trails, make the parks a little bit more beautiful than they already were. So there were some nice advantages to not having so many people around last year. Honolulu is really a great city for having the AOGS meeting, as we found in 2018. We have a great convention center. That convention center is close to the hotels, just a short walk from the beach, lots of good restaurants around. Personally, the things that I like most about living in Honolulu is access to the ocean. In the evenings, on the weekends, my friends and I have been paddling our one-man canoes, usually at least 3 times a week, sometimes more. I've also recently been doing some scuba diving and hope to be doing some more of that. Of course, weather is a big attraction. June is probably one of the best months of the year. Not very much rain, not too hot. So we think that the venue, again, should be perfect for our convention attendees.
This time, it'll be different. I'll wake up for that sunrise. I'll look with my eyes, not my phone. I'll slow down to see every little thing. I'll make tomorrow a brighter place. I'll stop to smell the flowers. I won't just do it for the gram. I'll say yes to everything. This time, it will be different.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to I beg your pardon, AOGS live in Singapore. My name is El Kwang, and I'm your MC. Today, we are beaming live from Marina Bay Sands Hybrid Broadcast Studio. Now, to our in-person audience, thank you so much for joining us today. It's good to have you here. To our virtual participants, thank you for dialing in from all over the world. And we promise you today's third session is going to be so amazing. Now, obviously, geosciences, as we know, are essential to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals and developing improved environmental insights for future generations. However, does geoscience have the right profile in our education system? So our moderator will lead a great team of experts, and we'll go into a discussion in a while's time. But before that, I'd like to hand the screen over to a lovely man that you may be very familiar with, Takehiko Sato-san. Do you know that he is a keen runner? And so far, since the beginning of the year, he has already covered 650 kilometers. Talk about passion. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our lead organizer, our AOGS Assistant Secretary General, Sato-san, for his welcome address.
Thank you very much, El. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for participating the last of our three panels during this first time ever AOGS Live in Singapore. So I'm really glad organizing this. We have so far had two fantastic sessions, climate change and the exploration and the science this morning. But it was not possible only by myself, but it was possible with teamwork with co-organizer. One of co-organizers is sitting in front of you, Benoit, and another person is Robin Robertson, current Secretary General of AOGS. So I'm really happy being here as one of audience people to enjoy a very important discussion about geoscience education today. Before entering into the session, I would like to welcome our Society President, Professor Chunchi Wu. Unfortunately, Professor Wu cannot make it today in person or virtual participation, but so he kindly sent us his video message to welcome you. So let's hear Chunchi Wu's message, and then I will hand my microphone back to El. Okay, so let's listen to Professor Wu.
Hello, everybody. On behalf of AOGS, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to attend our first ever AOGS Live in Singapore hybrid event. First of all, let me thank Takehiko, Manoa, and Robin for organizing this special AOGS event. The focus of this event is to discuss current issues such as climate change, science exploration, and geoscience education. This event is an essential activity for AOGS to engage with the community for facilitating debate, information sharing, and providing networking opportunities. Again, appreciate your support of AOGS and wish you have a fruitful time in this special program, AOGS Live in Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu and Sato-san, for your wonderful words. Now, Sato-san mentioned earlier, yesterday we had the climate change panel. So if you have not seen any of it or participated yesterday, we have a surprise for you because climate change is so important to me and a friend, and his name is Crystal Alexander. He's the general manager for Song Division Asia. So what he did was he joined us as a participant and listened to all the keywords throughout the session and used those keywords and created an original song and music video. So we're gonna play the video just for you at the moment, and I hope you enjoy it.
These are the words that we need to hear. Listen to the messages loud and clear. Professor Thorne got the facts around our human influence, uncharted territory with multiple references. Dr. Raghavan gave us the science of climate change on our water cycles. Professor Cole helped with dynamic evidence to help with the scientific confidence. The ocean is hurting from our human pressure. Modern call to change our ways forever. Yeah. Climate change will not beat us down. It affects us all. We must answer the call. And it starts with us, and we must start now. Well, Francisco helped us understand the information and the problems caused by urbanization. IPCC poured over the literature to give us the truth, the bigger picture. Professor Hartog, budgets and the AR6. Professor Canadell is in the mix. Professor Lee has shown us the way to improve day by day. We know the sources, so we know the solution. It's time for action. Yeah. Climate change will not beat us down. It affects us all. We must answer the call. And it starts with us, and we must start now. Future students are the key to fixing our mistakes. The time is now, no higher stakes. It affects us all, we must answer the call. Climate change will not beat us down. It affects us all, we must answer the call. And it starts with us, and we must start now. These are the words we need to hear. Yeah. Listen to the message, loud and clear. Our children's world. Oh, it's in to listen. Our children's world is in our hands. Today is the day to take our stand.
Wow, what did you think? Did you like that song? I hope you love it as much as we did. So now we're going to go into the panel discussion, and our moderator is Prof. Adam Switzer. Now, other than having multiple titles and responsibility at the Nanyang Technological University, I'd just like to let you know a fun fact about Adam before he brings his 310s and a steward on stage. And do you know that Adam's favorite food in Singapore is bak kut teh? And for those who are not from Singapore and don't know what it is actually pork ribs cooked in a really nicely infused, herbal infused broth. So the next time when you're in Singapore, do try that and do sort of like hit Adam up and he'll show you where to go. So without further ado, please welcome Adam, who's going to bring you what he calls the Graham Norton Show. And throughout the session for the virtual participants, please send us the questions in the Q&A box. Adam.
Well, a very good afternoon to you here in Singapore, those of you here in the live audience, and those of you online in Singapore and around the world. Yes, my name's Adam Switzer, and I'm here to introduce the AOGS live session on the future of geoscience education. So to get started, let's get some of our panelists on board here. And it is true, we have a 10 and 2 TANs. So if we could have first joining us on board, one of my colleagues from Nanyang Technological University, Associate Professor and Associate Chair, Graduate and Research in the Asian School of the Environment, Professor Benoit Ten. Joining us next is the Chief Executive of Singapore Space Technology Limited, Ms. Lynette Tan. And our final panelist is the Senior Manager, Technology, Office of Space Technology and Industry, or OSTIN, Wei Lin Tan. And joining us online is Ian Stewart. Ian Stewart this is probably the trickiest one I've got to pronounce, the El Hassan bin Talal Research Chair in Sustainability in the Royal Scientific Society. Great to have you online with us today, Ian.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone.
So let's get things started. We've got a bit of cover here with the future of geoscience education. It's a rather big topic. We've just seen a rather inspirational song, and we need to think about the future of educating people in geoscience education. So our panel today is going to discuss a couple of topics. What I'm going to do first is ask each of them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background first, and then talk about maybe one statement or one thing that we think we need to consider for the future generations in terms of geoscience education. So in order, I think we're going to go with Benoit first, then we'll go to Ian, Lynette, and then Wei Lin. Okay, so over to you, Benoit.
And thanks everybody for attending this session. So as Adam mentioned, I'm the Associate Chair for Research and Graduates, so close to education for graduate students. My research interest is on volcanoes, but geoscience is not just about rocks and volcanoes. It's a field that we need to be able to adapt and face new challenges. The Earth as we know it is changing, and is changing fast. How do we, as educator, adapt to this? So as educator, we need to be up to the challenge and make sure we always give the right tools to the future generations so they can themselves tackle future challenges. Thank you, Adam.
And now to Ian, if you could just briefly respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah, so Ian Stewart, I'm a geoscience, I was professor of geoscience communication at the University of Plymouth. where I kind of combined research into kind of standard research into geohazards and geoenergy, etc., with working with BBC Television, making documentaries. So I then got interested in interdisciplinary research, studied at Sustainable Earth Institute, working with social scientists. And I'm currently in Jordan now, in Amman in Jordan, interested in how geoscience communication can tackle fundamental global challenges, or in this case, regional challenges around climate change, disaster risk reduction, energy, water, etc. So it's a pleasure to join. And I guess my provocation in the context of this theme would be that this is a time of huge dynamic change, as has just been suggested. And my sense is that at the moment, geoscience, the community in general, and the institutions and geoscience education framework isn't fit for purpose for what's coming, because we are facing a full-on paradigm change. And I think we're trying to get around it by just modifying business as usual. And I don't think that's going to be enough. So I think there's a huge challenge for geoscience communication, education ahead.
Great point. Now to Lynette.
Hi, I'm Lynette. I work in Singapore Space and Technology Limited, which is a space organization here. I'm trained in chemical engineering, and my interest here in geoscience education and the future of geoscience education is really in that we're trying. This is a field that's studying Earth, which is a habitat that we all live in, and like it or not, Earth has a lot of internet working subsystems, and one element of it is human, with the urbanization, our modern way of life, which is exerting pressure on geoscience, on the planet Earth. And I think it's an interesting topic because geoscience really puts Earth into the center of the discussion and topics, while a lot of education talks about how to make lives better for people. But in the field of geoscience, we're now learning the pressure that humanity is impacting, and Earth will balance itself. That's my very strong belief. It is a dynamic system. It will reach a balanced equilibrium. And I think that the challenge is really how humans are going to be part of that balance, with the planet Earth, with our habitat, and not expecting the habitat and Earth to change, to adapt to our lifestyle and our habits. So I think it's a very important topic, a very important education stream to have here. And it's really not getting the kind of attention it deserves, which is why I'm really happy and very privileged to be part of this panel with all the experts here and to do my part to raise a profile of geoscience education.
Thank you, Lynette. And over to Wei Lin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wei Lin from the Office for Space Technology and Industry, or AUSTIN for short. We are the National Space Office for Singapore. And my background is that I did my undergrad in geology, and then I kind of went over to the dark side and did grad school in material science, in my defense on perovskites. And then now I work in government in the space industry. So I think how geoscience education is very close to my heart because it was only after switching fields that I sort of appreciated what an excellent foundation an earth science education gave me to develop an understanding in various different kinds of sciences, and also to give an appreciation for how that impacts society. So I'm very excited to be with such excellent educators here today. I think from the perspective of space, I'm very hopeful for the future of geoscience education. We have unprecedented amounts of data now with more and more satellites going up. And all this is available on the internet. Any kid can go and look at it and learn for themselves. So I think this is one note that I'm very hopeful about, and I hope that we have a good discussion on it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you to all our panelists for that introduction. We'll have some opportunities throughout this discussion, and it really is going to be a discussion, to take some questions for the audience. So those in the audience here, please think about your questions, and those online, you can send your questions through. So, please, think about what we're talking about here, and if you have any questions, we'll open them up to the audience a little later on. Perhaps to get the ball rolling, I can ask a question of Ian. In your experience, what makes a good geoscience educator? What are the characteristics of someone who's a good educator in the geosciences?
I think the characteristic of a good geoscience educator is the same as a geoscience communicator, which is empathy for who they're talking to. So being interested in the audience. I mean, the thing about geoscientists, I've never really met a geoscientist not insanely passionate about what they do. They love in a weird way where this almost cult really about rocks and so, and so, for a lot of the normal people out there, the ordinary people, they don't get it. They don't get this fascination with stones. So I think that, of course, for us, it's not stones. It's much broader. It's the planets, how it works, etc. So the passion's almost invariably there. But I think the connection to the other side about why people should care about our world isn't always there. We kind of treat it often as well, of course you would want to know about this because it's important. And of course, people don't want to know about it because they're getting around in their daily lives. And it's the same, I think, with students that come in. Most of my students that come in are interested in dinosaurs and plate tectonics. They kind of think initially they want a job in plate tectonics, So there's a bit of a kind of progress through seeing the breadth of the subject and starting to really understand what it's all about. So I think that I would say that's the key point, is really caring about the other side, the audience that you're trying to reach, whether that's a bunch of students in your classroom or a journalist or a whole world out there of the general public or a politician.
A very good answer, and I think we'll come back to that a little bit later with the panel. But I want to flip the coin now from the educator to the graduate, and I'm going to ask my colleague Benoit a question. I think the key thing here is, the future of geosciences is very much dependent on the quality of geoscience education that we can deliver right through from the high school and junior schooling through university to people graduating, going out. And so in terms of your role, Benoit, what makes a good geoscience graduate? We've had this discussion at NTU several times about, what do we want from our graduates at the end of our program, and what does industry want? And we've consulted industry on this, and so I'd be interested to get your thoughts on what makes a good modern geoscientist in terms of a graduate.
Thanks for the question, Adam. So I think a good graduate student coming out with a geoscience degree, it's not only someone that will be extremely good in her or his field of research, which it should be, but it's not only that. And on that, I will second Ian on being a good communicator, being able to collaborate with colleagues from different fields. Geoscience is not just rocks and plate tectonics. It's physics, it's chemistry, it's math, statistics, observation from space. All of this is geoscience, resources, water, name it, So coming out as a graduate student, yes, you are good in your field, but you need to be able to communicate with colleagues and with the policymakers, adapt your dialogue to the people you are facing. So, and I think Ian described that extremely well.
Yeah, I want to follow that up a little bit with, we're going to change course a little bit. But one thing I found really interesting when listening to the introductions just then, myself and Ian and Benoit are what we would probably consider to be more traditional geoscientists. And but Lynette and Wei Lin both mentioned that they started and then they switched, and that they're not geoscientists by the traditional route, and they're working in space and technology. And I think what I want to do now is I want to shift. Let's turn to space and technology. You know, it's moving so incredibly fast, and you know, people from Star Trek going into space yesterday, and you know, new platforms going up for remote sensing, new satellites going up, new technology being deployed every single day. The space and technology ecosystem is changing so quickly and so rapidly. You know, what does the space? We know what we want as a traditional geoscience graduate, but what is the space and technology side of the geosciences, which is so important to AOGS? And we have a lot of people in AOGS that are into space and technology. How do we really, you know, make sure that geoscience is educating people for your industry as well, because it is such a rapidly expanding and growing industry. So maybe if we go to Wei Lin first.
Thanks. So we we are kind of on the cusp of a paradigm shift in how space and in the relationship between space and earth science. Traditionally, we would have big government missions, and all the scientists would, you know, come together and tell you the requirements, and then you would build the mission according to that. But now we're entering this new space age where you have constellations of lots and lots of little satellites that have one or two kinds of payloads, one or two kinds of imaging sensors, and we are transforming into a very data-heavy environment. And I think not all of us might have been trained in handling very, very large data sets, in utilizing, for example, artificial intelligence to aid us in analyzing all this data. So I think in terms of the changes that we'd like to see in geoscience education is, in addition to the traditional education, we would also need people with the skills in data analytics, in AI, to deal with this data. Because if you're taking all this data, but you don't have enough people, don't have enough expertise to analyze it, then it's all kind of just going to waste. So that's one of my perspectives. I'm sure a lot of other points of note for the space industry, which I think I'll hand over to Lynette.
Thanks, Wei Lin. You know, I think the kind of students entering the workforce for geoscience, for space, and resonating with what Ian said as well, and you know how Wei Lin is introducing the space sector. Essentially, I think we're all looking at the same thing, right? So Ian talks about people being super passionate and excited about rocks. You know, we have a lot of that in space as well. In fact, they're fascinated with nothing, okay? They're fascinated with vacuum. They beat that. So I would say three things are very common for a student, a professional to be successful in geoscience and space. One is inquisitiveness. You know, when you see a problem and a challenge, do you get demoralized? Because there's so many problems, so many challenges, things are constantly changing. And in the case of space, and a lot of times in geoscience, you can't actually go inside there to figure out what's wrong. You know, the satellite is in space, the rover is on Mars. You know, you're talking about going into a volcano. You can't do that. But when the signals are not there, you're not getting the right answer, you're not figuring out why, you know, we want people who are challenged and say, hey, what's happening? And not, oh, again, you know, so that kind of natural ability to be inquisitive is very, very important. The second point is holistic. You're talking about people from multiple disciplines. You know, there's physics, there's chemistry, then there's artificial intelligence, there's remote sensing, there's computing, there's in situ processing. You really need them to be able to have a holistic approach to look at subsystems and how they are interwoven with the bigger systems, and how when you make one change or you see a parameter changing, how that's going to affect the rest of the subsystems and the final result, or what's going to finally happen. So two, having a very holistic approach in understanding what you're looking at is very, very important. And the third point here, Ian, I'm not plagiarizing, I actually do have here empathy, which you said that already. To communicate, in a lot of the work we do, you have regulatory. the government, the business people, the enthusiasts, the fanatics, and students and educators. And because we're looking at this industry, which is very literally planetary scale, you have people who are interested for various reasons. And that kind of empathy to know what you're looking at, why are they concerned, and being able to deliver it to, in a way that makes sense to them is very, very important. And this would really be the X factor in a successful professional researcher, scientist, or student in either geoscience or in the space industry. Thanks.
Very good points. I think, I'd love you guys to come and talk to some of our senior administrators, because Benoit and I have, we had long discussions about including data analytics and remote sensing and artificial intelligence and computational science into as core courses in a geoscience program. And it's good that all those things were mentioned in the key attributes we're looking for. I want to go. I'm going to come back to Ian in a minute, but I want to go back to the question I asked Ian and ask the rest of the panel. The way we teach geoscience has changed so much in the last 10 years, and specifically over the last 2. And Ian, I'll get your thoughts on this in just a moment. But maybe Benoit, you could start. What makes a good geoscience educator?
Yeah, well, thanks, Anam. So a good geoscience educator, I will reflect in what I said earlier, need to be aware of the changes. All of the panelists mentioned that the system we are living in, they are all interlinked, changing fast. So as educator, we need to adapt to this as well and make sure we keep our students up to speed, being it with statistics and AI, being it with being able to appreciate the fact that geoscience is not only rocks and fossils, right? So I think we need to remove this from people's minds. Geoscience is really across so many different fields. And I think we'll be successful if when the students leave the classroom, they realize that they can make an impact, they can make changes, and for that, they need to be able to communicate. Again, communication, I think, is one of the key things here, but communicate with colleagues, communicate with children, with parents, with all those communities. So I think adaptability is one of the key things for being an educator now, and adapt to the changes.
Okay, yeah, Lynette?
The educator. Well, actually, in Singapore Space and Technology Limited, 6 months ago, we spun off Space Faculty, which is an education spin-off, leveraging our decades of experience in space and science tech, and to encourage disciplines that are outside of space, but which can coalesce with space tech to have a greater impact for the students. So part of the DNA of Space Faculty is to teach people and train them to understand the impact of technology that they will yield that will affect the planet, and to instill in them a sense of ownership of the planet we live in. So again, to have the ability, in geoscience context, to geoethically reflect the impact that they have on the planet. So I feel for a field such as geoscience, it's the challenge for the educator is to bring hard sciences, into something that businesses understand. A lot of the funding inevitably comes from government, but also from business and industry. And a lot of the conflict comes in the different priorities that a geoscience specialist, researcher, scientist would have, and the concern that a business would have. A lot of times they are in direct conflict. And I think an educator, should be able to bring out the different focus, the different impetus, and lead the students into thinking when they embark on their journey in their profession, how are they going to reconcile that to ultimately do the right thing, that their training has taught them So bringing the business industry into the picture, into the education, could be something we could focus more on, pay attention to, because it will affect how much impact, they will have on society.
Wei-Lin, I don't want to say anything about age, but Wei-Lin, you're probably closer than I to the undergraduate days. So do you have any comments on what makes a good educator? Thinking about your experiences, more recent than mine in undergraduate education.
Thank you for giving me the chance to say this from the perspective of a student rather than from the perspective of a space office. But one of the professors who made the biggest impression on me was someone who cared about where their students came from, because geoscience is a very contextual subject. Some of us came from cities. We had never seen a rock before. It was all concrete. And some people had grown up hiking the Rockies. So she took the effort to get to know each and every student, what their background was, and teach introductory geosciences to their experience and to their interests, because people who live in the city and plan to continue living in the city will have very different ambitions and very different interests for learning geoscience than someone who comes from the countryside, someone from a different country. So I think a good geoscience educator, or just a good educator in general, is just someone who is able to help the students contextualize what they're learning to their present circumstances as well as their futures.
Great, a fantastic perspective and a very important one to get. I'm going to turn to Ian now. I have a question for him. One thing with your experience with BBC, you've made a number of fantastic documentaries, and key to a good documentary is them being engaging and engaging the audience. How can we as geoscience educators be more engaging? I look at comments that we get on faculty appraisals from students, or faculty feedback on students, and a lot of it is this person's either engaging or they're not engaging. What can we do to help people be more engaging as geoscience educators, to make sure that we actually capture the attention of that next generation?
I think one of the things that geoscientists are fundamentally, and this is something I've only really cottoned on to in the last few years, is we're really good storytellers, because the nature of our science requires us to be. We study this really abstract thing that we go back hundreds of millions of years and reconstruct this thing, usually based on a scattering of rocks, huge uncertainty in there. But on the basis of that, we create a map, or we create a cross-section, we create a whole narrative history of a region or a fault or whatever it is. But we don't seem to think of that as a geoscience skill. And I think that bringing that out, that we are storytelling, and stories and narrative are really important. I mean, that's what the BBC kind of trained me in, is the importance of a story, and a visual story as well as a kind of emotional story. So I think we can bring that out, and we've got all the content. I mean, compared to bench physics and bench chemistry and bench biology, we are head and shoulders above the other sciences in terms of the impact on television. The main areas of science that work in television is kind of astronomy, cosmology type of stuff, planets and where we've come from up there, archaeology and geology, and we've got we've got all of the action. We've got these amazing 4.5 billion years. So all of that works really if you connect it with stories. What I would say as a caveat, though, is I think the danger is become lazy, and we think that's enough. And all of the empirical evidence of communication tells you that simply telling people stuff, even with a good story, doesn't necessarily change the way they think about things. So I think there's far more to it than that. I think what we all also going to have to learn as geoscientists is how we engage in authentic dialogues with other people in order to understand where they're coming from and integrate it with our knowledge. So simply being a better storyteller it will not, I think, get us to where we need to be as a subject and as a community.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very good point. You know, this idea, it sort of goes to what Wei Lin was saying, where she was talking about the most engaging professor she had was somebody that looked at everybody's individual story. And it goes back to that idea of empathy and compassion, understanding the background of students that are coming to the geosciences that may not have particular skills or may come from a particular background. And I think that their stories do allow us to connect with people that we might not normally connect with. And so, you know, taking those fundamental, the most exciting parts of physics, chemistry, math, and the basic sciences and putting them into stories is fantastic.
Can I just add something there on that point of you know, different communities coming into geoscience? There's a paper published last week in Nature Communications that was looking at the motivation of students coming in and comparing it from, if you like, conventional groups coming into the geosciences, mainly white, and marginalized groups from different ethnic minorities. And there was a big difference. And what was interesting was, whereas the normal kind of sell of travel and landscape and also about money and salary worked for one demographic, not as strongly as I think as it did in the past. For the other one, it was altruism, it was about social change, social transformation. That's what they wanted. So I think there's a really important part in geoscience now about what is our purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? Because I think the new generation that's coming through is much less interested in, you know, they're wanting to change the world that they see in front of them in a much more fundamental way than I think I was or anyone I know in geoscience. So I think that aspect of diversity is fundamentally crucial.
Yeah, very good point. And I think, yeah, absolutely. And we see that here, just on this small island of Singapore, that students that are coming at the courses from a very different perspective in terms of why they want to study something, and it really is very interesting. I think one of the things that is key here that has emerged over the last 5 years is this dramatic increase in the interest in space and space technology. And so I'm going to turn to the Tans. I'm going to turn to Wei Lin and Lynette. Everybody loves space. You know, everybody's fascinated by space. But how can we best use space science, or perhaps use is not the right word, but facilitate, you know, education for space science so that, you know, that it fits into our future education, so that it fits into the future landscape of geoscience. It's very important in the AOGS community and landscape. But we tend to associate space science with physics when it's so very much ingrained in the geosciences. And so, you know, how can we best use space science as a platform, that exciting platform that it is? You know, Ian was talking about how, you know, the Earth and the amazing landscapes we have provide us a platform. But how can we use space to engage that next generation of students? Lynette first.
Well, yeah, we did spin off space faculty, which exactly is that, which is to use space as a starting point and to get people interested into very deep topics and important conversations, which otherwise would be quite hard for a student to receive. And space, you know, maybe unlike geoscience, and that's where we are beneficiary of it, it's insanely exciting. Think of the number of Hollywood movies, right? I don't get into a conversation with someone not mentioning Star Wars, Star Trek, you know, and then it even goes back to the Jetson family, which I watched as a kid. So space is insanely popular with people from all walks of life and from all culture, all ethnicity, you know, different countries. And I think using that to bring home key messages is important. and it should be leveraged. And I think that's a lot of the work that we are doing here. So for space faculty, we are in touch with like students from 30 over countries. We teach them about space technology that they're interested in, and then we use that to lead on to important conversations like climate change. Now that you're looking at this, what has changed on the planet in the last 30 years, right? We use that to tell them important geoethics conversation in who looks after and owns Earth. Is it humanity's responsibility, or are we actually a beneficiary of what Earth has to offer? And get them to start thinking about very fundamental issues that are now existential issues. So, coming from a space tech industry, and we're benefiting from so much hype. I mean, every famous celebrity has a space movie, right? Matt Damon, Tom Cruise, everyone's been to space. So how do we leverage that to drive home important message? And very happy to say with space faculty, we're exactly trying to tackle that. We're using the DNA of understanding technology and its impact on planet, on human being, on existential threats is there. So again, which is why I'm really happy to be here with the platform with all of you. There is a lot of conversations we need to have around it. And geoscience is very, very important. But I do feel, coming from a space tech, we're really benefiting from a lot of hype, which I think we should leverage to really benefit what is important.
Wei Lin?
I think Lynette's made a lot of the most important points already, but maybe I'll tell it from a more personal perspective. I'm a huge fan of Mars, the planet Mars. And for the longest time, I thought that meant that I was a space enthusiast. And then I learned more about it and discovered that actually I wanted to study geology instead. So in a way, space, because it is so prevalent in pop culture, as Lynette has mentioned, it really helps draw kids into all manner of just curiosity questions that they eventually learn that maybe the answer does not lie in this specific field called space, and this brings them into all the different fields in STEM. Another point that I think space is inherently good for is that space is mostly remote data. Right? You send your spacecraft out, all that you get back is data. Unlike field geology, where you can go and look at the rocks and the formations. If you use space, you're looking at pictures of Mars, pictures of Jupiter. This is all now, thanks to the internet, completely accessible to everyone. Everyone can have their own personal space adventure on the internet. There are all these like platforms, EO browser and everything, where you can just spend hours and hours looking at your own planet, looking at Mars, in all the different wavelengths. You can even do your own mini science project for free. And I think that is a good tool to use to leverage space to teach geosciences, in a sense.
That's a fantastic segue to my next question. But before I get to my next question for our panelists, I want to stop just briefly and ask if there's any questions from the audience. We have an audience here in front of us, which is quite refreshing, actually, to see people sitting in front of you in Singapore. So is there any questions from the audience? We'll open up to the audience first. Microphone around if someone wants to ask a question. We have a question down the front here.
My name is Cheng Hoon, and of course I live in Singapore. And so far, I think there's a lot of interest in space. But I want to know a little bit about the role of hydrology, because the AOGS, the second largest section, is actually the hydrological sciences section. I have come to understand that it's really very important, because within Asia Oceania, we have a lot of countries that are water-starved, including Singapore. So how then do we reach that interest? Because on the one hand, space is very attractive. right? In fact, amongst friends who I know and colleagues, they used to be saying that space is for the rich. And then a lot of other earth sciences, especially hazards, water issue, floods, they are for the poor, right? So from an education point of view, because we're educators, right? So what's the balance here? What do we encourage our younger people to do? Children, the next generation, shouldn't they care about people who are affected by issues like this?
So the question, to summarize, I think for the panel, and maybe Ian, you can comment first on as you're our online guest, is the importance of hydrology. So in terms of hydrology, water is by far the most important part of the Earth system, and so and it's the biggest part of the AOGS community. And so how do we make sure we're educating people about water and hydrology in a geoscience world?
I think just to step back a little bit from the context of the question is interesting, because I think it touches on a fundamental tension, I think, within the idea of space science and within geoscience, because a lot of space science, a lot of space technology, Earth observation technology can get used and is being used to look at this planet. And it's really important in terms of many of the indicators around things like sustainable development goals and well-being and things like that. But actually, a lot of the narrative that comes out, and it's been touched on there, is actually about that exploration of other worlds and actually moving away, starting to land on Mars. And it was interesting, Prince William this morning has been in the news having a go at Bezos and Musk and things like that, and saying, look, it'd be nice if you actually could use that intellectual energy and capacity at solving the critical problems on here and on the planet. And it's a tension that goes back and forth. But I think what it reflects is a fundamental uncertainty about what the purpose of space exploration and space science is. Is it for good here, fundamentally, or is it for some further good, longer term good up there? Now, of course, you can say it's both, and it is, but actually that's a bit of a cop-out, because I think what it needs to do is really settle on which of the two it's really around. And in that context, going back to the question, hydrology is one of the critical issues. And if you come down, I'm in Jordan, and this is the second or third most water scarce country in the world. It sits with a number of neighbours that it relies on either for groundwater or for surface water through rivers. Each of those neighbours argues with each other and contests the water budgets that are around. So there's transnational problems. Even within the country, there are problems between there's a Ministry of Water and a Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, and they contest all the things. So Earth observation has a critical role there in standardizing and equalizing across all of these places to say, this is the reality as we understand it. So there's a huge leverage to be played around particularly transboundary issues. The new technologies that are actually able to look at groundwater extraction is both exhilarating and terrifying when you look at the results. So that's what I mean. I'd like to see the space science community really come out about what is the long-term purpose. And in that sense, I think there's lots that it can be contributing about the fundamental problems that face us in the next coming decades here on Earth.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ian. And I fundamentally agree. We're talking recently about hydrology and river systems in Southeast Asia. And the estimate is about 15% of river systems in Southeast Asia are adequately river gauged. So if you're looking at flood issues like we have here in Singapore, ours are incredibly well gauged. And we understand flooding very well in this country. But as soon as you leave Singapore to the rest of Southeast Asia, you have so little data, and you have to fundamentally rely on remotely sensed data to examine flooding, and you're going to have to for the future. And so there's a fundamental link between hydrology and space sciences and technology that is there for the future. I think over to our panel. Benoit, do you have anything to say on hydrology? I know you're a volcanologist, but you walk over some rivers.
Yeah, no, I can add something. I think one of the things, bridging the gap between space science and hydrology is, as Adam mentioned, we can monitor what's going on when there is like underground water extraction that is visible from space. So having like global monitoring system like this to reinforce policies, maybe at some point we'll reach the global policies on how to treat our water resources. And to come back to the initial question as well, is hydrogeology is important because it's not only a matter of extracting the water. In Singapore, the rain, is enough, right? There is enough rain in Singapore. However, how do we store it? So hydrogeology is also looking at how to store rainwater for later usage. So it's huge, and and everything that Adam said already, and I'm sure Lynette will add something. So I'm not surprised that hydrology is one of the biggest sections, though volcanoes are pretty awesome, but I'm a bit biased.
Yes, volcanoes are awesome and remain awesome. But Lynette, before I get to you, we've had several discussions in the past about the massive diversity of the industry needs for space technology. And so hydrology is just one of those needs. So I think I know where you're going to go with this, but yeah, I'd love to get your perspective here.
Well, I'll also go back to the audience's question about the perception that space is for the rich, and then if you're not so rich, you care about more important things like water. So that's not true. I think Adam gets more salary than Waylon and I combined. So proof in point. And if you think about it, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, for example, he made his money from Amazon, delivering goods that people want. And then he started Blue Origin, using the money, the wealth he has amassed to go into the space industry. And that's the same with Richard Branson, with his Virgin Empire. And then he created Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit. So they didn't make their money from space. They made money, then they went into space. So just to correct the perception, and also it's interesting because as educators and talking to young children, they do get very excited about space and they think it's going to solve all the world's problems, including paying the bills. But the space industry is competitive. It looks for talent like any other industry. So it has an equilibrium, a salary range that is, I can assure you, not out of the world. Okay, so we're very grounded people, and there's nothing very, you're not going to be a billionaire being in the space industry. What we've seen is the billionaires get into the space industry and create a lot of hype. And that's the challenge that we sometimes deal with. It's the opposite side where we get so much hype that we spend a lot of time, sieving out the signal from the noise and telling people, hey, the work that we do is not to conquer Mars and, have an intergalactic war or multiverse. The work that we do is the purpose that we are trying to figure out, or we have here is, well, to everyone is different, but a lot of the purpose of space education, space science, space discovery is in the spin-off effect that it has on humanity. Reverse osmosis, looking for water, sensing for life forms. There are many spin-off technologies from the investment into space. Solar cells is one of them, right? Because deep in space, you can't bring a battery pack. So you have to have solar cells. And now we're using that, to tackle climate change. That is a very big purpose of space investments and space technology. For every dollar spent in space research, $7 come back, economic value to the society. And definitely hydrology is a very, very fundamental challenge in any part of the world, in the world, the earth we live on. And I think it does get good notice, attention. And in fact, I'm sure the utilities company make a lot more money than an astronaut, FYI. So, so I think these are important conversations. I'm not an expert in hydrology, but I would say that I don't think these are topics that people are averse to. I think we're focusing on them, we're interested in them. Do you really need space science to, enhance that interest in hydrology? I'm not so sure yet. But certainly, I think anything that deals with existential threat into society, is increasing. There's a lot of increased attention on it.
Great, thank you. Wei Lin, do you have a quick answer in a minute? And then maybe we can take another question from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what everyone has said, that especially from the Singapore perspective, from Austin, we're looking at space science not so much to go to Mars and more to benefit society on Earth. I am also not an expert in hydrology. But I think if you watch this morning's session, Dr. Yoon Sang-hoo, he talked about mapping flooding using SAR technology. And yeah, so in general, we make use of space science primarily for Earth's benefit and also, Singapore's benefit.
Okay, thank you. We have a bit of time. We've got more than just under half an hour left. Any other questions from the audience before we move on? Is there anything online, Elle?
Yeah, there is. There is an interesting comment from Swatna. She feels that it is very important to introduce geoscience as a subject in junior school and high school by extracting it out of geography. And a question from Vina: can we add differential equations to the undergrad curriculum? This is where my modeling lectures start. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with the first question. I'm not sure who's going to take the differential equations question.
We learned that in high school, right? Differential equation. We learned that in high school.
Yeah, I'll throw that one to Benoit and Wei Lin, I think. But the first question. What was the first question now? Yeah, it's very important to introduce geoscience as a subject in junior school and high school by extracting it out of geography. Okay, I'm gonna direct this one to Ian, because Ian is a geographer at times, as been called many things, but geographer at times. Extracting geoscience from geography. I have my own opinions on this, but what do you think?
It's tricky because different countries have their education systems differently. So in the UK, we have geography as a course, and there is geology as well. So it does appear separately, much less popular. Geography tends to, you have plate tectonics and big scale stuff, and volcanoes are in there. So we have lots of times of people who come to, we have a geography course at university and a geology course, and we often get people turning up for geography courses because they want to do volcanology. So there is a fundamental confusion there. But the point, I think the broader point is that geography is much broader and much more inclusive in terms of the stuff that it works. So it goes from that physical all the way through to human. And my argument increasingly is that interdisciplinary, multifaceted stuff we have to look at. The other thing I'd throw in there was something they did in Western Australia a few years, well, about 10 years ago, where there was a tension and they were going to get rid of geology. And there was a kind of crisis because Western Australia, rooted in geology, and it was going to be mixed with environmental science. And what they found was they actually created a course that was earth and environmental science, and environmental science teachers got together with geology teachers. They created this course. And what it actually did was it increased hugely the audience of people who were introduced to geology, which meant that actually geology numbers went up because geology was suddenly embedded in this broader area. So I think that what we need is we need to be very clear about the identity of geological aspects when it's in the geography curriculum. I would argue for that. So in other words, arguing at plate tectonics, showing that if you're interested in plate tectonics, you go into geology, you don't go into geography. And if you're interested in geohazards rather than risk, you go into kind of geology. I would go for that rather than trying to, create them separate, because you'll just end up, geology is always a minority sport. it will always suffer on its own, and it's a small thing. And if you want it to be continue as a tiny little area, fine, but I don't.
Very good point. Benoit, do you want to add anything to that? I think here in Singapore, we have geography has plate tectonics and climate change, and the curriculum has been modified over the last decade or so, and there's a significant component of the more physical aspects of geography. There's also the human aspects, but the geography curriculum has changed. There's environmental studies programs, and students coming to undergrad to us, Benoit, in the Asian School of the Environment are coming primarily from geography or from physics, chemistry, and math backgrounds. And so we get this balance, and it makes for a fascinating class. But Benoit, maybe you could expand on that.
I was going to mention the same things. When we have interviews with prospective students, there are sometimes concerns that they haven't done any geoscience or geology classes, and then our answer is, wait a minute, geoscience is chemistry, physics, math, differential equations, just to throw it in there. So it's really, we really enjoy the diversity of backgrounds of our students, and geology on its own. I think I would second what Ian was saying. Is there's so much things that goes into geoscience. So maybe you don't believe it, but you've been studying geoscience, even though you was not a name in your class, but through physics, through chemistry, through math, you built the tools that are needed for a good geoscientist. So yeah.
Okay. Would you the space side of things? Is there anyone with a deep love of differential equations?
A lot of differential equation in space science, a lot.
Yeah, Lynette, just before you answer, Lynette, that question, Vina has just came back with a clarification saying that most high schools in the West teach up to calculus. Differential equations is usually in university, except for honor students.
Yeah, I know in the UK and Australia, upper level math in high school has differential equations. But Benoit, you want to chip in with a French perspective?
No. I've been through differential equation as well. But if you don't have these backgrounds, universities are broader than the departments you are going in, and you feel like you have a lack of math, then there's always classes that are offered, and it's not uncommon to have one class that will put you up to speed, because yes, differential equations in geoscience are needed. We mentioned hydrogeology, but modeling volcanoes, how the climates evolve, climate circulations, all of those will be using differential equations. So if you feel like you lack these backgrounds, then when you enter higher level educations, feel free to follow a class on this and build up the fundamentals that you will need to understand the modeling aspect of geoscience.
Okay, we have time for one more question before we move to sort of the final parts of this. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's turn to the elephant in the room. My latest paper was about black elephants. They're the ones that we don't talk about. But the elephant in the room, COVID and geoscience education. I know Benoit and I have some very strong opinions on this. A couple of things come to mind, but one of the fundamental things, and I think I'm going to go to Ian first here, is there's been a huge uptick in the demand for online material. And what is it that makes good online material? I've been asked this by my colleagues. How do you make effective online education materials?
I think it's a new emerging area for all of us, really. And I think that, as COVID struck, it's sent shivers of fear around everyone about how they convert the material they have for the in-person classroom stuff onto online. But I think new things have emerged, and I think that in some ways the emergent digital environment is potentially a more interesting environment for connecting across with material. But I think that, and for certain, I mean, so here's one thing. So in my class, I'll give you an example. So I taught in a university in southwest England, very low diversity amongst our staff, ethnic diversity, and our students. We would be teaching all this kind of content. One of the things that I did in the last year, actually just before COVID started, was if I was given a talk about the tectonics of the Himalayan origin, for example, the Himalayan mountain belt, I would normally have just delivered that with my normal kind of PowerPoint. And this one, because it was an online thing, I was able to interview scientists in India and Pakistan and Tajikistan and integrate into that their materials. So when I gave my talk, about 20% or 30% of the talk was me. The rest of them was these voices from these places. So although the students weren't getting these different perspectives in the room, they were getting them in a way that they didn't before. And that was pretty easy to do. It was a very simple procedure. And then the full interviews that I had with people were stored online and they could follow up. So I think with all these things, there are disbenefits and benefits. And I think it's about the balance in between the two. And I think, as you hinted at, it's trying to make that online environment to play to its strengths and make it really engaging. And the strengths are you can connect globally in an instant with this same technology. That's what I would put out there as the key one for me.
Yeah, interesting points. Benoit, do you want to follow up on that one?
Yeah, so no, I think being able to invite colleagues that are sitting on the other side of the globe and then they can share their very expert knowledge on one topic, that is something that is becoming more and more, the new norm, and that's something that came clearly out of the last 2 years. You mentioned the appetite for online material, and I think one key thing that we need to be aware of is those long-lasting lectures are not going to fly. So, bite-size, knowledge capsules that can be absorbed in 5-6 minutes are key. We need to be aware that I think personally that interaction is still critical. So having a live aspect in all of those teaching, being it online or in person, of course, but in the interaction between the students that just ingest this capsule and the experts in the field is still critical and memorable. And if I have a few more minutes, I'd like to share the challenge of going to the field. I mean, Geoscience is very close to the field, right? And we've been lucky enough to go to the field and bring our students out of Singapore to the field, and it's the same in many different places. And we've been facing airport closure, no travel. So how do you deal with that? Well, you have to turn around and look at what you have next to you. And there's a lot of things that you can discover regardless of the country you are in right now. I can guarantee that behind the concrete or under the concrete, there is rocks. And there's a lot of things that you can do. And then the last things maybe is to get use of this technology, and virtual field trips might be a nice way to reach out to a much broader audience in terms of physical ability or in terms of different backgrounds. So with those virtual field trips, we have this opportunity to have a wide, broad impact on students, being it at university or high school. And then they might decide to go into more advanced studies, which will then bring them up to the field. And I'm a strong believer that we need to go and actually touch the field to fully appreciate it. But there's a lot of things that can be done virtually.
I think to summarize the take-homes there, I'm going to move to the next question. So the take-homes there are that you need diversity in your presentations, but there's opportunity in terms of being able to work with people that are on the other side of the planet or in a different environment or in a slightly different field that would be willing to be interviewed or deliver some content or interact with your class. And then there's also this opportunity. I remember in the early stages of COVID, Benoit and I were involved in discussions about how do we move all of our field trips to domestic field trips here in Singapore. And then when Singapore went into the circuit breaker, we had to move all of our domestic field trips in Singapore into online field trips back on the computer system. And it was a very trying time, but we have to be dynamic. And I think it's forced a lot of us to really evaluate and think about geoscience education in a different way. And I think that's really cool. We're running towards the end of time. We've got about 13 minutes left. I want to just shift to the future. And this whole panel, the aim of this was to have a discussion about the future of geosciences. And so I want to get summary comments, some summative comments from all of our panelists. And perhaps I could start with Ian. And thank you very much for joining us today from Jordan. And it's great to see you. And I think, if you could give us a couple of minutes of summative comments about what's your opinion of the future of geosciences in education?
I think geosciences and geoscience education is a fork in the road, really. It's got an existential crisis on. Across the world, numbers in geoscience departments, whether it's Australia, Europe, UK, America, are dwindling because I think for a combination of things, it's seen less relevant, it's seen as a 20th century science, not a 21st century science. I think it's tied to fossil fuel, oil and gas, and it's tied to mining, which are now seen as environmentally destructive and not good, and contrary to the focus on climate change and et cetera. And geology has been a dead weight on this, as many of the climate skeptics have been geologists. So I think we have some responsibility there. So the danger has been that geoscience departments have, the way that we've been set up for the last 50 years is to feed into a paradigm of economic maximization, of economic growth. That's been the great acceleration. And now we're seeing that although we were very good at that, we were very good at delivering on that, the paradigm is changing. We're seeing the attention on the climate and ecological crisis. We're seeing social movements on the street around social equity that's starting to build up. And that they both tie into an economic change around the well-being economy, of seeing progress in different ways than just economic metrics. So a kind of well-being maximization paradigm shift is starting to come in. And the way that geoscience is dealing with that is to kind of adjust the quarter term. It's kind of taking a little bit on. It's kind of trying to do business as usual, but with, a few lectures on CCS, talking about geothermal, talking about water maybe a little bit more, but still essentially running the way it's always ran. And that this is a generalization, but it's pretty international generalization. And I don't think that's enough. I think we're going to have to change really dramatically. If the future is about well-being maximization, how does geoscience deliver well-being maximization? I think that we need to be bringing that question, that ethical question, into our undergraduate thinking and also our postgraduate thinking. Sustainability itself, sustainable development, was never something that was in a standard geoscience curriculum. It's starting to be. We're starting to see SDGs being touched upon in terms of research. We've got the first professor of sustainable geoscience, Chris Jackson at Manchester. So it's rising up, but I think that what we're doing is we're changing the surface. We're not looking at the fundamental architecture. Mentioned this before, what is the purpose of geoscience? What is its social purpose? And James Hutton, right at the start, 1783, when he did his theory of the Earth, talked about, this habitable world, and the understanding of the genesis of that world is for that aim, it's for that purpose. So we had it back in the Scottish Enlightenment when geology comes in. But I think we've kind of lost it in this rush for economic maximization. So I think geoscience has to be very careful. It has to evolve pretty quickly. Industries that it feeds its graduates industry are changing, so those industries are changing. The education system's changing, and universities are at the danger of not changing and being caught out, really. So I don't think I've got the answers, but I can see the problem is much more deep-rooted than I think a lot of places acknowledge.
Thank you for the summative comment. Yes, we do have a lot of work to do, but you know, in terms of the geoscience department, Benoit and I work with social scientists, ecologists, and engineers in the same school. So that breadth is perhaps helping us out a little bit. Benoit, if you could give a summary comment in a couple of minutes.
That is a tough one. I mean, we've been covering a lot, and giving a summary of this is tough. In terms of keywords, I think communication is one that came out. Again, communication with your peer for collaborations, communications with, and being a good, listening to what is needed in terms of industry, but in terms of ongoing and future challenges. What are the skill sets that will make a good geoscientist to impact and changes what we do on Earth, but also in outer space, right? I mean, if you land on an asteroid, you need to understand what's going on there. What is this asteroid? What can I extract from it? And all of this is geoscience. Adaptability, being aware of those dynamic changes as educators to make sure that our students will quickly adapt and be relevant for the industry and the Earth as we know it, or as we don't know it anymore, actually. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Benoit. And I think last comment to Lynette.
Maybe if we're not from inside the geoscience sector, I'm a bit more optimistic about the future of geoscience. In fact, I'm going to have a conversation with my daughter tonight about what she's going to major in. So, because of the current climate where there is a lot of pressure on the Earth, which is our habitat, it's the place we live in, it's our life support system, I think the importance of the state of the Earth is going to come into the forefront of every discussion, and you can see even in banking, they talk about sustainable investment, and corporates, they have sustainability goals. It's now protecting the planet is now part of everybody's conversation. And geoscience is the study of the health, the systems of the planet. And I feel very strongly it will come into the forefront of everyone's attention. So it was nice to hear from Ian about the recent history where geoscience is an economic optimizer. I think geoscience is going to now be the way to maximize our survival here, the survival of humanity on planet Earth. And that will be at the front of every conversation. So I'm optimistic about the future of geoscience. Unfortunately, this is a good thing coming out from a bad thing because we've not been very kind to our planet. But there will be a lot of focus and attention, and I think the education of geoscience will be very important. And back to that part of empathy, talking to sociologists, talking to policy, talking to the businesses, trying to educate them on how their manufacturing footprint, the landscape that they're investing in, literally, should play a positive impact onto the state of the Earth. So the ability to understand the complex internetworking system, of various subsystems of Earth is going to be very, very important. It's a very complex issue, and we need geoscientists to be able to explain that to the business people and to the government. So it will be very important.
Ian, I see you nodding frantically there. I assume that's agreement.
Thank you very much, because I very appreciate Lynette saying that, because I didn't want to sound too negative. And the reason is, Lynette's exactly right, that in the past, the economic maximization section, we've been the technician. We've been just finding stuff and feeding it in. My sense is that geoscientists need to be in the lead because we're this integrated thinker, interdisciplinary in the way that you've described it. And we see the planet in its holistic sense. What I was getting at is I think geoscience education and geoscience courses have to change dramatically to deliver that. And that's the bit that I'm unsure about. But I was very thankful for Lynette for actually setting out that much more positive vision, because that's the vision I see as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, last one, Wei Lin, do you have some summary comments? We have about 4 minutes left.
Everyone's already made such really good points. I think earth science literacy, as Lynette pointed out, is going to come to the forefront because it's just a topic that's on everyone's minds now. And I also kind of wanted to come back to the topic of accessibility of data these days to the general public, not just to the people who are studying geosciences. And I think the accessibility of that data will give people more understanding, more literacy of our environment. So I'm also pretty optimistic about the future of geoscience education. It's not just about the hard science that you study in school, but also bringing that accessibility to everyone around you, your friends, your parents, to create a very earth science literate, very earth science conscious society. So that's about all I have.
Well, I think it's a fantastic opportunity here we have that, if we can change that paradigm, if we can move geoscience education in the right direction to make sure that it is as useful as possible to society going forward, I think that's a fundamental thing we can do. And AOGS as a society is all about being in Asia for Asia. And we have very much that at the core focus of the society, in that we want to make an impact. And through education, that is one fundamental way. In the last 3 minutes, I'm going to hand over to Al, who is going to close the session for today.
Thank you, Adam. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to please give a hand to our wonderful panel of experts, as well as Adam for a wonderful job done as a moderator. So in closing, please don't forget, our meeting next year is in June, Honolulu. Please come join us. And in the meantime, please take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon. And a big goodbye from Singapore.